Title trailer hook. Visual. Dramatic, high contrast, aerial brawl of a smoky skyline metropolis slowly panning down to a twisted pile of rubber and shattered reinforced, concrete covered in gray dust. Text flashes on screen with cable news corner, graphics, $150 million, 20 seconds. 14 dead narrator, urgent gritty, fast-paced, $150 million in today's money. That is exactly what the state-backed mega developer, the Longcheng Real Estate Group, was pouring into the skyline of a booming eastern district in 1973. It was slated to be the largest, most prestigious luxury residential high-rise complex ever planned for the municipality's expanding suburban border. 468 high-end condominium units. Every single one of them sold out before the roof was even capped. Middle-class buyers and wealthy investors were already finalizing their premium interior floor plans, expecting a smooth, triumphant move-in date by the end of August. Sound effect. A deep, earth-shaking thud followed by the sound of screaming metal and shattering concrete, but they would never get those keys. Because on the afternoon of March 2nd, the top half of the 26-story luxury megablock simply ceased to exist. In just 20 bone-chilling seconds, the entire upper section of the tower suffered a total structural failure, cascading straight down to the foundation in a cloud of blinding white dust. 14 construction workers were instantly crushed to death by the time the debris settled. The terrified buyers who had poured their life savings into this premium project were left staring at an empty, jagged ruin. They wouldn't step foot inside the rebuilt structure for 4 agonizing years. How does a $150 million engineering marvel from a premier developer collapse like a house of cards in broad daylight? The answers are hidden deep inside the ruthless speed of the country's early high-rise boom. And a fatal decision that turned a luxury residential dream into a massive, multi-story tomb, the suburban boom and the audacious master plan, the 215 visual, archival blackened, white footage of rapid urbanization, diesel bulldozers clearing massive fields of dirt, and tracks of rebar being let down next to highways. To understand how this catastrophic structural failure happened, we have to look back 5 years earlier to the late 1960s. The major metropolitan fringes were undergoing an unprecedented construction explosion. Municipalities were redrawing their borders, converting rural farmland and old obsolete infrastructure into high-density urban hubs. The prime piece of real estate selected for this massive project had previously been a small, active provincial airfield. It sat directly at the intersection of Jinshan Highway and Shengli Road, a critical transit junction located just 10 kilometers from the central government district and the municipal core. Recognizing the immense financial potential of this strategic gateway, the Longcheng Real Estate Group bought out the entire airfield site. They didn't just want to build a couple of standard apartment blocks. They came forward with a master plan that was breathtakingly audacious, even for an era defined by aggressive urban expansion. Visual. Graphic animation over a 3D map showing the master plan. Popping up layer by layer, the blueprints outlined a sprawling, self-contained mini-city, 8 ultra-modern residential luxury towers, 6 Grade A corporate office skyscrapers, a premium international hotel, a massive centralized multi-story shopping mall at full build-out. This single development was engineered to house over 30,000 permanent residents. It was designed to be one of the largest, most heavily integrated mixed-use mega-projects anywhere on the eastern coast. The invincible developer and the flat plate system. 215-345 visual. Camera pans up a completed, gleaming glass and concrete high-rise tower, then cuts to an animated instructional diagram of a slab and column system with no beams by 1973. Longcheng Real Estate Group wasn't just another company. They were an absolute juggernaut of the construction sector. They had evolved into a massive, highly trusted entity, managing a massive portfolio of commercial and residential high-rises across multiple provinces. They operated with the complete, unshakable confidence of an outfit that had never encountered an engineering challenge they couldn't conquer, or a deadline they couldn't meet. And by the early months of 1973, their grand vision seemed to be right on track. 2 of the massive residential towers were already completely finished, inspected, and occupied by eager tenants. A third tower was rising rapidly into the sky, its raw concrete skeleton nearing the final upper floors. This third high-rise was officially designated as Building Block A4. Barrique A4 was a 26-story monolith constructed entirely of heavily reinforced concrete. To maximize efficiency, the structural engineers designed the tower using a structural framework known as a flat plate slab system. In structural engineering, a flat plate system means each floor consists of a continuous, flat slab of solid concrete supported directly by vertical load-bearing columns. Look closely at the engineering diagram. There are no deep horizontal beams, no heavy steel girders, and no structural joists. Just raw horizontal slabs resting directly on vertical concrete pillars. For a mega developer, the flat plate system is an absolute goldmine. It is incredibly cheap, it vastly reduces the overall structural height of each floor, and most importantly, it is blindingly fast to build. Using standardized formwork, construction crews could pour an entire new floor slab every 3 to 4 days. For a management team desperately trying to deliver 468 pre-sold luxury units by a rigid, legally binding August opening date, that extreme building speed wasn't just an advantage, it was the entire point of the operation. But this hyper-accelerated building cycle has a hidden, unforgiving flaw. And it's the exact reason why the tragic collapse of Building Block A4 is still meticulously analyzed in structural engineering programs today. The fatal chronology of unshoring concrete, 345-515 visual. Stress test simulation on an animated concrete slab. The slab turned from bright red, weak to dark blue as a timeline ticks by. An injection of weight caused the red slab to crack. Fast-track concrete construction is locked in a constant, dangerous race against time and physics. Concrete is a living, chemical material. It does not magically reach its maximum design strength the moment it is poured from the pump or dumped into the wooden forms. It cures slowly through a chemical process called hydration, gaining strength over the course of several weeks. In the first 48 to 96 hours after placement, a freshly poured concrete slab is structurally brittle and weak. It is completely incapable of supporting its own massive weight, let alone the weight of the machinery and workers above it. To prevent a catastrophic mid-construction collapse, builders must utilize temporary vertical supports called shoring. These are heavy wooden or steel posts rammed tightly between the finished floor below and the newly poured slab above. The shoring acts as a temporary skeletal system, transferring the massive, active downward load through the lower levels of the building until the fresh concrete cures enough to stand safely on its own. For the construction of Block A4, the local structural engineering firm of He, Lin, and Kang had drafted explicit, legally binding construction protocols. Their stamped engineering drawings, on file with the Municipal Housing Bureau, were absolutely crystal clear. 2 full stories of active shoring had to remain completely locked in place directly underneath every single newly poured slab. 1 additional story of reshoring had to be maintained further down to distribute the residual curing loads safely. This meant that at any single second of the construction process, 3 entire floors beneath the active top pour needed to be fully structurally supported. Furthermore, the National Concrete Institute guidelines for slab spans wider than 6 meters strictly mandated a minimum shoring duration of 10 full days. These engineering specifications were not casual suggestions. They were not flexible guidelines meant to be adjusted for a project schedule. They represented the thin, unyielding line between a building that stands tall for a century and a building that completely self-destructs. On the wind-swept construction site of Building Block A4 on the afternoon of Friday, March 2, 1973, those exact specifications were being completely, systematically ignored. The ticking clock. March 1:30. Visual. Intense digital timeline revaluation. A digital clock ticks on screen. 13. The camera zooms in on a massive crane lifting a hopper of fresh concrete high above a suburban site. Narrator. Gravelly, measured but intense. Friday, March 2, 1973. On the bustling construction site of Building Block A4, the project were riding a wave of absolute euphoria. They weren't just hitting their aggressive winter deadlines. They were actively crushing them. The Lunar New Year rush was long over, and the push to deliver the 468 luxury units by August meant that every single hour on the site was optimized for maximum speed. By 1:30 in the afternoon, the weather over the Eastern District was cold, damp, and unforgiving, but the work never slowed. The site was a mechanical anthill. Roughly 150 construction workers were actively deployed across the vertical face of the structure, completely unaware that the concrete beneath their boots was a structural time bomb. Two massive, diesel-powered climbing tower cranes were anchored directly inside the core of the building, one secured firmly at the 20th floor, and a second heavy unit anchored down at the 14th floor. Their long steel booms swung continuously through the gray winter sky, lifting heavy pallets of steel rebar and massive buckets of wet concrete mix. Up on the highest level of the tower, the crews were pushing hard. They were actively pouring the massive horizontal slab for the 24th floor. Hundreds of cubic meters of fresh, wet, unhydrated concrete were being pumped straight up the vertical riser lines, spreading a crushing, dead-weight mass across the wooden forms. Shoring directive violation. 133.15 visual. A high-contrast diagram of the tower's top floors. Area labeled 24 floor, highlighted in wet Rio. The focus shifts down to the 22 Egan floor, where the temporary support system is flashing an alarming red. But it wasn't the massive weight being added to the top of the building that doomed Block A4. It was the critical engineering safety protocol being dismantled just 2 levels below it. While the concrete pumps were straining to finish the 24th floor pour, a subcontractor crew was deployed on the 22nd floor. Their specific assignment for the afternoon? Stripping formwork, armed with crowbars and hydraulic jacks. These workers were systematically unbolting and ripping down the heavy wooden shores, the vertical load-bearing posts, that had been supporting the concrete slabs poured just days earlier. Let's look at the catastrophic engineering timeline calculated B. Why federal forensic investigators, the concrete forming the 23rd floor slab, directly above the heads of the stripping crew, was exactly 4 days old. According to the strict municipal building regulations and the stamped blueprints filed by the structural design firm of He, Lin, and Kang, those vertical support shores were legally required to remain locked in place for a minimum of 10 full days. The concrete needed that crucial window to chemically cure, lock its molecular structure, and achieve its mandatory structural stability. Visual. Tech and Elias's slide. Design. Strength Tricolement vs. Actual measured cap piece. By pulling the wooden supports out. On day 4, the workers were forcing an uncured, structurally immature slab to support an unimaginable amount of weight. The independent engineering review conducted by the China Academy of Building Research later calculated the exact, terrifying physics of that moment. The blueprint design specified that the concrete slabs must achieve an ultimate compressive strength of 3,000 pounds per square inch, or roughly 21 megapascals, before facing design loads. But because it had only been curing for 96 hours in the damp winter cold, the actual in-place strength of the 23rd floor slab was hovering at a dismal, fragile 1,200 pounds per square inch. The slab was operating at less than half of its required structural capacity. It was soft, brittle, and structurally naked. It was being forced to hold up not only its own massive weight, but also the immense live load of the active 24th floor concrete poured directly above it. 2:30 p.m. The mechanics of punching shear. 3:15 visual. Detail 3D CAD animation focusing on a single reinforced concrete culminating a flat slab. Satellite lines show the shear stress beyond rated cap paddus. The concrete slab suddenly rips and slides down the column. At exactly 2:30 p.m., the structural breaking point was reached. The failure did not start with a loud explosion or a snapped steel cable. It began silently, deep within the molecular structure of the concrete surrounding several critical load-bearing columns on the 23rd floor. In a flat-plate slab system, the most dangerous structural hazard is a phenomenon known to forensic engineers as a punching shear failure. Because a flat-plate system lacks horizontal beams or wide drop panels to distribute weight, the entire downward force of the heavy floor slab is concentrated directly on the small, square perimeter where the horizontal slab meets the top of the vertical column. Think of it like a heavy sheet of cardboard, resting on the sharp tip of a vertical pencil. If you pile too much weight onto that cardboard, the pencil won't snap. It will punch a clean, sudden hole straight through the middle of the sheet. That is exactly what happened inside building block A4. The uncured 1/200 SPY concrete of the 23rd floor simply could not resist the immense localized shear stresses. Under the immense pressure of the active pour above, the structural integrity ruptured. The heavy vertical concrete columns essentially punched upward, straight through the floor slab. The moment the slab ripped away from its columns, all structural stability vanished. With no load-bearing supports left beneath it, the massive 23rd floor slab dropped like a stone, slamming directly onto the 22nd floor below. The 22nd Progressive Cascading Facial 5/630 visual. The animation widens to show the full multi-story tower. The initial falling slab triggers a systemic domino effect, with each floor instantly exploding under the impact in a rapid, top-down chain reaction. The structural impact was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The 22nd floor slab was already structurally vulnerable because its temporary shoring had just been stripped away by the work crews. Suddenly, it was hit with the kinetic impact of thousands of tons of falling concrete from the 23rd floor. The 22nd floor failed instantly. This initiated what structural forensic specialists classify as a top-down progressive collapse. The combined weight of the 24th, 23rd, and 22nd floors smashed into the 21st floor. The 21st floor was never engineered to handle a dynamic, multi-thousand-ton impact from above. It buckled and gave way within milliseconds, adding its own massive weight to the descending avalanche of debris. Dot's effect, a continuous, roaring thunderclap mixed with the sound of twisting steel and sonic cracking. The collapse sequence was a terrifying, accelerating vertical domino effect. 21, 20, 19, 18. The massive concrete slabs tore through the core of the building, all the way down to the heavy bedrock foundation. The entire upper half of the multi-million-dollar luxury tower was completely pulverized, falling straight down through its own center. The total duration of the collapse? Just 20 seconds. In less time than it takes to read a single warning sign, a premier architectural masterpiece, the pride of the district's real estate sector, had self-destructed. The collapse tore a massive, 60-foot-wide vertical gap, clean through the absolute center of the high-rise. From the edge of Shengli Road, what had been a continuous, proud 26-story concrete monument now looked like two completely separate, jagged buildings standing side by side, with nothing but open sky and hanging steel rebar exposed in the middle. At the base of the structure, a mountain of raw construction debris, gray concrete dust, and sheared reinforcement steel piled up more than 40 feet deep, entombing everything and everyone caught in its path. The comparative analysis, an unforgiving pattern, 145 visual. The graphic on screen shifts to a multi-Wivman satellite map, showing several major development zones across the country. Red cross hairs blink over urban clusters in districts like Chongqing, Tianjin, and Shenzhen. Narrator, authoritative, forensic tone. The catastrophic destruction of building block A4 was not an isolated anomaly. To forensic structural engineers analyzing the case, it was the explosive manifestation of an unforgiving, systemic pattern that was quietly spreading through the country's ultra-rapid urban development cycles. During this era of aggressive growth, municipal boundaries were expanding faster than supply chains, and safety protocols could naturally keep pace. When you look across the wider landscape of high-density construction engineering, the mechanics that caused the failure on Jinshan Highway revealed deep, disturbing parallels to other major architectural disasters across the country. Consider the structural vulnerabilities discovered during the foundational settlement scares in the unfinished residential megablocks of Tianjin's outer districts, or the severe structural cracking that led to immediate occupancy bans along the high-rise corridors of Chongqing's waterfront developments. Visual, 3D reconstruction of a vervinal tower collapse side by side with Block A4. highlighting insufficient reinforcement in urban slab construction. In all of these cases, the core vulnerability remains identical. The structural engineering system was pushed far past its physical tolerances to satisfy an unforgiving commercial timeline. In the rush to secure high returns on premium pre-sold units, developers systematically treated structural concrete curing as a mere administrative milestone on a scheduling chart. Rather than an unyielding law of chemical engineering, the engineering parallels, the critical slab intersection, 145-330, visual. The on-screen CAD diagram illustrates a top-down cross-section of the slab chemtrails, showing how load stresses concentrate in a radial pattern around the vernal supports. The structural engineering community was already reeling from a similar progressive collapse that had leveled an 18-story reinforced concrete residential tower in a coastal special economic zone just 2 years prior. In that disaster, as well as the failure of Block A4, the fatal engineering flaw tracking back to the flat plate slab design was the total absence of continuous, integrated steel reinforcement running directly through the intersection where the floor slab meets the vertical columns, without deep structural crossbeams or robust column capitals to anchor the horizontal planes. Any localized failure at a single column instantly transforms into a regional structural failure. Look at the data provided by the Municipal Construction Commission's Forensic Safety Unit. Structural parameter design specification, actual site condition.
Block A4 concrete compressive strength 21 MPa, 3000 psi, 8.2 M1200 psi. Shoring duration under.
Fresh pour 10 days, minimum 4 days, prematurely stripped. Active load distribution 3 levels of actives support less than 1 level functioning when that 23rd floor slab dropped. The shear kinetic energy overstressed the adjacent vertical columns by more than 400% of their maximum engineered deadweight capacity. Because there were no continuous structural ties to bind the remaining sections of the floor together, the building lacked any internal redundancy. The structural design allowed for no alternative load path. Once the punch failure occurred at the central column grid, the entire interior structure became an active chain reaction of cascading weight. Investigative appellatos, enforcing accelerated answers, 330, 515, visual. Archival images of official investigation. Teams wearing hard hats and white lab coats, meticulously measuring rubber thickness and extraction cores from huge chunks of debris. Within 48 hours of the catastrophic failure, a specialized, high-level joint investigative task force was permanently deployed to the site on Jinshan Highway. The team was anchored by senior forensic engineers from the local municipal housing bureau and top structural dynamicists from the regional branch of the China Academy of Building Research. The investigative mandate was absolute. Discover exactly how a premier, state-backed mega-project could suffer a total structural breakdown in the middle of the afternoon without any external seismic trigger. The engineering team launched an exhaustive, multi-layered forensic review of the entire development site. They deployed a 3-dimensional finite element computer analysis, a cutting-edge engineering technique for the era, to digitally reconstruct the exact stress distribution across the 22nd and 23rd floor slabs at the precise moment of the collapse. This, UAL, digital simulation showing the mathematical finite element model of the building block compressing and rupturing under red-zoned stress. Einstein, they brought in heavy field testing rigs to extract structural core samples from the remaining uncollapsed concrete sections of Block A4 to analyze the structural density and chemical composition of the mix. They cross-referenced the developer's internal construction logs, reviewed hundreds of pages of daily site inspection records, and conducted formal, mandatory technical interviews with dozens of surviving steel fixers, concrete pump operators, and site supervisors. What they discovered buried deep within the forensic data was a profound, catastrophic failure of quality control that went far beyond a simple math error on a drafting table. It was a complete breakdown of construction safety oversight executed in the name of corporate efficiency. The brutal verdict of forensic science. 5/5/630, visual. Narrator faces the camera with a heavy archival blueprint revealing the seal of the investigation commission. Key terms from the technical report flash on the screen over the text. The Joint Task Force did not mince words. Their final engineering report was brutal in its technical specificity, permanently altering how regional high-rise stability would be evaluated for decades to come. The primary, definitive cause of the total structural collapse was the premature removal of the structural formwork and vertical shoring from underneath the freshly poured upper levels. The secondary accelerating cause was the critically low compressive strength of the 23rd floor concrete, which had been left to face immense operational loads while completely uncured. The formal language of the technical report noted that the daily sequencing protocols executed on-site by the project management team did not comply with any national engineering standards. The blueprints, stamped and authorized by the structural design firm of He, Lin, and Kang, had explicitly demanded a multi-tiered safety cushion of vertical shoring. But on the active deck of Block A4, that safety cushion had been completely stripped away by supervisors looking to reuse the valuable wooden forms on the next floor ahead of schedule. If you are gaining valuable insight from this deep forensic breakdown of high-rise engineering disasters, make sure to hit the subscribe button right now. Misbuilt unpacks a massive structural mega-project failure every single week, exposing the hidden engineering flaws behind the world's most dangerous high-density construction disasters. From this critical point, the dark saga of building Block A4 moves out of the engineering lab and steps directly into a harrowing zone of corporate survival, local legal battles, and a desperate search for the workers trapped underneath 40 feet of pulverized rubble. The voices from the rubble. Witzing discussion. 2 visual. Dramatic reconstruction over slow motion. Aerial footage of the twisted high-rise structure. Smoke and dust hovey over a 40-foot deep crater of shattered slabs and steel interior rebar. Text on screen flays, 2:30 p.m., the collapse narrator. Deep solemn, intensely personal. Among the dozens of construction workers fighting to survive the catastrophic structural failure of building Block A4, that cold Friday afternoon was a 22-year-old steel fixer named Zhao Deming. Zhao had arrived from a rural farming village in the Western Hills only 3 months prior, seeking a steady income in the municipality's booming suburban economic zone. On the afternoon of March 2nd, he was assigned to a specialized maintenance crew working inside a deep mechanical service shaft down on the 2nd floor, installing heavy steel safety railings along the edge of the lower residential balconies. The first indication of imminent doom didn't come from a visual crack in the concrete walls. It came through the sudden, frantic shouting of his site supervisor's handheld radio, followed by the sight of the senior foreman running down a concrete corridor toward a central escape stairway. Sound effect, a low, gigantic rumbling resonating through subwoofers, mimicking an earthquake. Then came the sound. Zhao Deming later described the noise as a terrifying, subsonic roar that vibrated straight through his chest cavity. The distinct sound of thousands of tons of high-strength, reinforced concrete tearing away from its steel mountings 20 stories above his head. Decades later, speaking to forensic engineering investigators and municipal reporters, Zhao would still recount that he could physically feel the entire structural mass of the tower giving way, compressing, and buckling violently beneath his work boots. It was the kind of core sensory trauma that time can never erase. Zhao and 2 of his closest co-workers dropped their heavy steel wrenches and ran toward the western emergency exit stairs. They burst through the lower exit doors and tumbled out into the cold mud of the exterior courtyard, just as the entire central core of Block A4 slammed into the earth. They survived. 14 of their fellow crew members, positioned higher up along the active pouring zones of the 22nd and 23rd floors, were not as fortunate. They were dragged down with the descending avalanche of concrete, instantly crushed inside the shifting interior void. The night survival and emergency response, 2:45 visual. Meticulous reconstruction of a nighttime rescue scene. Pitch black surroundings illuminated by industrial floodlights. rescue teams in orange and orange industrial uniforms with heavy excavator equipment, plowing at concrete blocks. By 6 that evening, the active construction site on Jinshan Highway had been transformed into a massive, brilliantly lit disaster response hub. Heavy industrial floodlights were hauled in on flatbed trucks and mounted around the entire perimeter of the collapse zone, casting long, eerie shadows across the mountain of pulverized building materials. A massive joint emergency response force had been mobilized, combining elite heavy rescue teams from the municipal fire departments, specialized disaster response units from adjacent provincial bureaus, and civil engineering crews equipped with industrial concrete cutters and sonic listening devices, visual, archival high contrast, photographs, showing families wearing heavy coats, standing behind local security lines on a suburban road watching the ruins. The physical scale of the structural wreckage was staggering. The top half of the 26-story luxury high-rise had collapsed into a dense, tightly packed pile of debris that stood more than 40 feet high at the base of the tower. Huge sections of structural floor slabs, still bound together by thick webs of twisted, high-tensile steel rebar, had to be systematically stabilization braced before emergency crews could attempt to tunnel into the interior cavities. Emergency rescue workers operated in continuous, exhausting 6-hour shifts through the freezing night, using heavy hydraulic jaws, diamond-tipped jackhammers, and specially trained search and rescue canine units to track down any sign of biological life buried deep within the concrete matrix. Just beyond the heavy security lines established along the edge of Shengli Road, crowds of local citizens and distraught family members stood in the freezing mud, waiting for any scrap of information regarding the missing workers. The next morning, the regional municipal newspaper ran a stark, single-sentence headline across the absolute top of its front page: "Tragedy on Jinshan Highway, Fivitalaire dead, 12 missing in prestigious suburban high-rise collapse." Over the next 7 days, as heavy industrial cranes peeled back the crushing weight of the failed 22nd and 23rd floor slabs, the official body count rose steadily, ultimately solidifying at 14 dead and dozens of life-altering physical injuries. They deflated penalties, the underbelly of accountability, 445-730 visual. Camera close-in on an official legal compilation document, covered in red bureaucratic seals. An animated graphic pops up highlighting a ridiculously low financial figure, $300. Once the recovery phase concluded, and the dust clouds finally settled over the ruins of building block A4, the narrative shifted from a story of structural physics into a dark, infuriating masterclass in corporate legal insulation and bureaucratic buck passing. The primary developer and general contractor of the multi-million-dollar Skyline development was the Longcheng Real Estate Group. A corporate behemoth with extensive T is across regional development boards. The specialized concrete installation subcontractor hired to execute the rapid pour schedule was the Minlong Construction Engineering Corporation, which at that exact moment was the largest commercial concrete contractor operating anywhere in the metropolitan zone. When the local Municipal Construction Commission and Housing Safety Enforcement agencies finally completed their formal investigatio, NS, and issued their official citations for the safety violations that had directly triggered the structural failure, the financial penalties were a brutal insult to the families of the deceased. The total administrative fines levied against the multi-million-dollar corporate entities across all combined technical safety categories amounted to just $13,000 in today's currency conversion. More shocking still was the specific fine issued for the unauthorized, premature removal of the 22nd floor structural shoring. The single operational decision that caused the punching shear failure that brought the tower down. The fine for that fatal engineering violation? Exactly $300. $300 for the structural negligence that ended the lives of 14 hard-working construction laborers and permanently maimed dozens more. Geography as destiny. The legal asymmetry. 730-10 visual. A red tone map highlighting provincial and municipal boundary lines running through a regional river system. One side is labeled highly restrictive state stat. The other is open civil. The avenues for the victims and their families to seek genuine civil justice or punitive damages were almost completely blocked by an asymmetric web of regional labor laws and geographical jurisdictional boundaries. Because the development site at Bailey's Crossroads sat just inside the formal provincial border of the neighboring regional council, rather than 6 kilometers east inside the central metropolitan core. The legal rights of the workers were dictated by a highly restrictive provincial labor compensation framework under the specific regional statutes active in 1973. An industrial worker was legally prohibited from filing an independent civil lawsuit against their direct employer or any secondary engineering contractor closely tied to the job site, provided that the company maintained active contributions to the Regional State Worker Insurance Fund. One of the lead plaintiff attorneys, representing several of the grieving families, a local legal specialist named Zhang Jun, openly expressed his deep professional frustration to regional reporters at the time. He noted that if the catastrophic progressive collapse had occurred just a few kilometers to the east within the central city limits, or a short distance to the north across the river boundary, his clients would have faced no legal hurdles in pursuing massive civil damages for gross corporate negligence. Instead, geography decided who could sue and who was legally silenced. The existing state worker compensation framework merely covered immediate medical bills and a tiny actuarial fraction of calculated lost future wages. It explicitly banned the pursuit of civil punitive damages for pain, suffering, or emotional trauma. It completely blocked the widows of the deceased steel fixers from ever forcing the executive directors of Longcheng Real Estate Group or Minlong Construction onto a formal witness stand to answer for the corporate speed-up policies that killed their husbands. The corporate entities paid what the local administrative tables dictated, filed their legal non-responsibility disclaimers, and prepared to resume their massive development operations as if nothing structural had ever occurred. The cold restart and the 4-year delay, 0:45 visual, heavy compilation reel of archival footage, time-lapse of the rusted, hollow skeleton of Block A4 standing under gray suburban skies, slowly transforming as new cranes are erected and construction, procols, resume under heavy oversight narrator, measured, forensic, sober, for 16 long, silent months after the catastrophic progressive collapse on Jinshan Highway, all construction across the entire Skyline Plaza site was placed under an absolute ironclad municipal ban. The local housing bureau and structural safety inspectors cordoned off the development zone, leaving the mangled, halved carcass of building block A4 standing as a grim, concrete monument to the high cost of unbridled speed. It wasn't until July of 1974 that the developer, Longcheng Real Estate Group, was finally granted legal clearance to clear the remaining debris and restart the project. This time, the wild, unchecked independence of the rapid building cycles was gone. The local municipal construction commission implemented an entirely new, highly rigorous regime of structural oversight. Specialized state engineers were permanently stationed on site, meticulously logging the chemical curing time of every single concrete batch and verifying the presence of the mandated multi-level vertical shoring systems before a single new floor could be authorized, followed by painstaking floor. The fractured tower was rebuilt. By the time the final safety certificates were signed and the occupancy ban was officially lifted, it was 1977. Visual, modern HD drone footage gliding smoothly past the gleaming facade of a fully completed, fully occupied condominium tower in a modern Chinese suburban district, 4 agonizing years after their original promised move-in date. The 468 buyers who had poured their life savings into the pre-sold luxury units back in 1972 finally received their keys. They stepped into an engineered structure that was now undeniably stable, but permanently haunted by the 14 lives sacrificed to build its lower levels. The cost of the lesson, from Jinshan to the massive power plant disaster. 145/330 visual, graphic split screen. On the left, the 1973 Block A4 collapse diagram. On the right, a dramatic reconstruction of a gigantic industrial, cooling tower collapsing inward under its own weight. But the ultimate, haunting question, whether the high-density construction sector had genuinely learned from the structural failure of building Block A4 would find a terrifying answer just 5 years later, on April 27, 1978, at a massive industrial power infrastructure project in an adjacent industrial province. The engineering community witnessed the deadliest single construction accident in regional history. A colossal concrete hyperbola cooling tower, engineered to serve a critical power station, suffered a catastrophic, top-down structural failure. The forensic investigation launched by national design bureaus revealed a sequence of operational decisions that was almost an exact mirror image of the structural failure on Jinshan Highway. Premature removal of vertical scaffolding and concrete formwork to maintain a tight production schedule, insufficient concrete compressive strength at the active upper ring of the pour, treating critical chemical curing times as a minor project management detail rather than an absolute law of physics. 51 construction workers lost their lives in a single morning because the core engineering lessons of the Jinshan Highway disaster had been treated by industry executives as isolated administrative problems rather than system. IC safety mandates. The legacy in Ahmed Engineering Code S. 335 visual. Narrator speaks directly to camera from a high-tech architectural laboratory. In the BA, a computerized finite element analysis runs simulations on reinforced slab intersections. It was only after this second, staggering loss of life that the structural engineering profession universally integrated the hard-won data from these failures into modern building codes. The tragic destruction of Block A4 completely redefined how high-density, flat-plate structures are designed and built across the globe. Today, regional and national concrete construction codes strictly mandate the inclusion of continuous, high-tensile reinforcing steel ties running explicitly through the center of slab column intersections. This specific design feature ensures that even if a punching shear failure occurs at a single column due to an localized overstress event, the horizontal floor slab cannot tear away entirely and drop onto the level below. It provides the building with structural redundancy, ensuring a localized failure stays localized instead of triggering a total, top-down progressive collapse. Furthermore, construction stage structural stability is no longer viewed as a flexible logistical decision left to the discretion of a site foreman. It is legally enforced as an integral part of the primary structural design condition, signed off by certified engineering professionals. The final balance sheet. 5615. Visual. Drone shot slowly pulling back from the Coed luxury complex, integrating it into a vast, thriving modern metropolitan skyline. As the screen slowly fades to black with subtle clone credits, the Skyline Plaza Tower that collapsed into rubble in 20 seconds still stands today, fully integrated into a bustling, affluent, mixed-use metropolitan hub. On the modern resale market, units within that exact, rebuilt concrete block change hands for approximately 2.5 million yuan each, reflecting the premium value of the district's mature real estate sector. That single unit valuation is more than 1,000 times the total administrative penalty that the local authorities levied against Longcheng Real Estate Group and its structural subcontractors for the deliberate scheduling shortcuts that killed 14 American-era workers on a cold Friday afternoon in March. The corporate juggernauts absorbed the minor financial losses, protected their executive boards through protective legal frameworks, and continued to build massive high-rise developments across the nation for decades to come, completely unaffected by the structural blood on their ledgers. The buyers of 1972 eventually got their luxury keys. The 14 men who died, building those keys left behind nothing but an anonymous, unyielding lesson embedded deep within the concrete codes of the modern world. Visual, text flash. Hit subscribe to uncover more expensive engineering disasters every week. This is Mizbuilt. Sound effect. System shorm and fade to black.